the first blue box was discovered by AT&T Security in September of 1961. And that's a vague photo of it there. And the reason it's called a blue box is because it was actually in a metal chassis that was painted blue. Jason talked a bit in his talk yesterday, if you caught it, about the importance of artifacts. I spent a lot of time talking to people who worked for the phone company security as part of this project. And one guy ended up, he was an old security agent, he ended up sending me just a box of documents that he clearly should have shredded before he retired. And one of them was this lovely little memo from the director of AT&T Security describing this first blue box. And it gave me enough information to actually track down the guy who built it, who's still alive. He was a little bit nonplussed to hear from me. I said, did you go to this university? He said, yeah. I said, were you involved in something called a blue box? And there was a long pause. And he said, that was a long time ago. But he had also saved a bunch of artifacts, which is where this bad photo comes from. I said, you were the first. And he said, well, I don't know that I was the first. I was certainly the first to get caught. Meanwhile, racing him for that honor of being the first to get caught were a group of Harvard and MIT students in 1962 called the Harvard Five. And they had also built some blue boxes then. By 1964, this stuff was popular enough that you may not be able to read it there, but this is an ad in February 1964, Popular Electronics. Toll-free distance dialing, bypasses operators and billing equipment, billed for $15, ideal for telephone company executives, plans $4.75. And by 1964, more people are independently developing blue boxes. Now, some of these are plans that are getting handed around. Some of them are people just figuring stuff out. A lot of people end up figuring it out just because they would hear these tones when they'd make a long-distance call, right? These MF tones. And they say, well, what are those? Huh, well, that's interesting. If I can hear them, maybe they can hear me. And let's try and figure out what the tones are. So something I was really fascinated by is how did people learn this stuff? An off-cited thing, which indeed the very first one back in 1961, was the November 1960 issue of the Bell System Technical Journal. And there is an article called Signaling Systems for Control of Telephone Switching. And if you were a technical person and you read this article, although this article didn't say, here's how to rip us off, it might as well have said that. I mean, it just completely laid the network open, right? And there were a number of phone freaks I talked to who said, well, you read this, and it just hits you. Like, this is what you do. And there was one guy I talked to who said, he's an engineer, his dad was an engineer, his grandfather was an engineer. And he said, well, I was taught in the scientific method. And if you have a hypothesis, it's almost a sin not to test it. So, in 2 weeks, he had a working blue box. He was actually the gentleman who built this blue box in the lower right-hand corner there. Another place that it came from was a book that AT&T published in 1953. It was a book for their linemen and plants people called Principles of Electricity Applied to Telephone and Telegraph Work. And it was a little bit earlier and less technical, more tutorial, but that was a source of information for a lot of people. There's also a famous book, or actually series of books, called Notes on Distance Dialing. And this was another AT&T publication in the 1950s. And this was like if the Bell System Technical Journal gave away the keys to the kingdom, this gave away not only the keys to the kingdom, but the detailed technical specifications of how the locks worked and how to make a key machine. I mean, it was just everything you wanted to know. But then, as I said, there were a lot of people who didn't use any of these resources. They just did a lot of skull work, a lot of thinking, a lot of listening, a lot of being clever about things.